Good afternoon. Welcome to the Fringe meeting on Falklands. Very happy to have you here, and we've got a very good panel. My name is Michael Clarke. I'm chairing this. I'm the ex-director, the retired director of RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, and I'm very happy to be chairing this meeting and sharing some of the ideas which our speakers have with you. We're not looking at the Falklands particularly from a defensive point of view. We're concerned as well with environment issues, research issues, and the values that the Falklands represents as we in Britain go into the integrated review and try to reposition ourselves for the global Britain that will follow the Brexit process. So we have 5 speakers. They're going to speak for 6 minutes each, just headlines, and then we'll open it up to a more general discussion. Our first speaker is Leona Roberts, one of the representatives in the Falklands. We're delighted that she's joining us today from the Falklands. They're 4 hours behind, so happy lunchtime, Leona. And she is the spokesperson on environmental issues, on public protection. She's also a historian of the Falklands, and with a Chilean father, she's very proud to be a 7th generation Falklander. So it's great to welcome you here. Leona, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And yes, greetings from a sunny but very windy Falklands. So in 2020, of course, we find ourselves in a volatile world faced with unprecedented global challenges and change. But what has not changed is the clearly stated wish of the people of the Falkland Islands to remain a part of the UK family. So I'd start by saying that Falkland Islanders will always be profoundly grateful for the commitment of the UK government to protecting our sovereignty. In particular, of course, for the restoration of our freedom following the Argentine invasion in 1982 and the continued defence presence here today. A reminder, I think, for people, in 2013, 99.8% Falkland Islanders, on a turnout of 92%, voted in favour of remaining a self-governing overseas territory. And so the British government's unwavering support for and promotion of our right to self-determination remains of paramount importance to us. So in this changing world, how do the Falklands fit in with a vision for global Britain? Well, there are potentially challenges, of course, including for us the possible economic impact should we lose our tariff and quota-free access to EU markets for our fishery and meat exports. There are the uncertainties and economic impacts posed by the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, the global issue of climate change. However, there are exciting opportunities too, and the Falklands stand ready to work with the UK as an active and mature partner. And we come to the table on our own merits and with the potential to add significant value to the UK in meeting its long-term strategic aims. So in the 38 years since the Falklands War, our islands have developed to become an internally self-governing and economically self-sufficient overseas territory. And our relationship with the UK has been transformed from one of dependence to one of mutual benefit. This long-established relationship provides shared environmental, economic and political benefits, and it's a partnership which we believe can develop further. So the Falklands are strategically located in an area of the world that is of increasing significance due to rich fisheries, the potential for hydrocarbons, climate change, trade, and of course the review of the Antarctic Treaty in 2048. The geopolitical importance of the region will only continue to grow. And the Falklands can serve as a genuine physical and electronic gateway to the region, providing a safe and secure base for the purposes of research and responsible development and protection of natural resources, including tackling such issues as illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing activity. We are uniquely placed to support the UK in Western strategic interests, increasing defence cooperation with other South American allies, protecting vital sea lanes, and the UK's Antarctic interests, and providing unique training opportunities also, of course, for our British forces. The Falklands, so we can provide the UK with a platform to monitor climate change, something which we believe will be critical in contributing to the UK government's goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2050. And it should be remembered that we are home to a very significant proportion of the UK's biodiversity. As well as acting as a scientific hub and research coordinator and indeed leader in the South Atlantic, the Falklands are a gateway to the Antarctic for science, research and tourism. However, if we're to achieve our full potential, the British government's role in facilitating some key enablers will be critical. Sadly, the ongoing threat posed by Argentina's sovereignty ambitions remains an ever-present reality of life in the Falklands. The degree of Argentine threats against our human rights and our economic stability can escalate and subside to some extent with each change in their government, but the positional approach towards our freedom endures. Argentina continues to impose sanctions upon the Falklands in an attempt to disrupt our economic growth and well-being, and recent statements demonstrate a refreshed intent to target our natural resources and limit our international connectivity. Despite this, Falklands unfailingly display maturity and behave as a responsible regional player. We continue to support the humanitarian work of the International Committee of the Red Cross to identify unknown Argentine soldiers buried in the islands. When the Argentine submarine San Juan was so tragically lost in 2017, search and rescue capacity and support came from the Falklands. And we have shared and continue to share scientific data on fish stocks, even while Argentina has drawn back from this, despite its significance to the protection of the biodiversity of the region as a whole. And in fact, it's worth mentioning we would like to see a regional fisheries management organisation established for the region. But so it should never be forgotten that that threat persists, and it is a reality still. However, the Falklands are a reliable and responsible member of the UK family, and in a region so often associated with instability, we are a beacon for British values. So a long-term strategic vision for the islands, with focus on protecting and growing our vibrant and diversified economy, will be essential in allowing us to achieve our full potential. So to sum up, in addition to strategic issues, trade, our obvious cultural ties with the UK, the Falklands should be seen as a mutually beneficial partner in a wide range of other fields, and providing a safe, stable and well-governed base for UK and Western interests in the Southern Oceans, the Southern Cone and of course Antarctica. So we believe the islands should be seen as a vitally important asset to the UK in the context of global Britain, and we look forward with excitement to further developing what is already a mature relationship. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Leona, thank you very much. That was a terrific summary and a great statement of the case. I think that the Falklands isn't extra. It's not just something that Britain is stuck with. It is actually a part of thinking about global Britain. And the point you make that it's a sort of physical and cyber gateway to so many issues in the South Atlantic, I think is very well taken. Okay, so let's move straight on to Tara Palembe. Tara is the Deputy Director for Innovation at the South Atlantic Environmental Research Institute. And if you look at her CV details, you'll see that she has looked at all aspects of environmental management in more or less every part of the world. She says she is triumphantly a generalist, and that's why she brings to this a great breadth of understanding. So Tara, tell us something about the environmental challenges that you're most interested in.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having us. It's a great opportunity and a pleasure to be a part of this panel, to be giving you all an insight into the South Atlantic Environmental Research Institute. So SARI, as our acronym is pronounced, was opened in 2012 to address the need for an umbrella organization to conduct and facilitate environmental research in the South Atlantic overseas territories. At the time, the Falkland Islands Economic Development Strategy for the islands had highlighted the importance of developing new economic activities to diversify the economy and generate new income to reduce reliance on the core sectors of agriculture, fisheries, and tourism. The SARI proposal offered an opportunity to develop a sustainable, knowledge-based activity, and one which has a clear synergy with the island's strengths in the environment, sustainable use of natural resources, and conservation. Falkland Islands have as many, if not more, unique selling points than any other sub-Antarctic location in terms of regional and globally significant science, including whole Earth system science. So we started out as a Falkland Islands Government Department from 2012 until 2017, after which we registered as a UC are on the Falklands Register of Charities and have a commercial arm. We conduct research in a variety of disciplines, including marine and terrestrial biology and ecology, geology and geomorphology, remote sensing, oceanography, climatology, and upper atmosphere sciences, and geographic information systems. Our main office is in Ross Road on Stanley, and it arguably has one of the best office views in the world. In the Falklands, we undertake multiple research projects, both at land and at sea. And because it's such an understudied environment, a lot of what we do tends to be a first. So for example, with the UK's Natural History Museum, we created the first online catalogue of the marine flora and fauna of the Falkland Islands. Under our current Marine Management Areas project, we are working with partners to provide data for a sound evidence base for proposing the first MMAs on the Falkland Islands. Another first is on land, where after 2 years of project work, visits to 200 survey points, 100 soil profile descriptions, 2,400 individual soil tests in the lab, and several soil model iterations later, the Falklands' first comprehensive current and online soil maps are completed. So we can show, for example, the peak depth now across all the islands. But probably the biggest first of all is that we have actually described 50 species new to science since we've been in operation. Although we originate and are primarily based in the Falklands, as you mentioned in the beginning, the Falklands is of course a UK overseas territory. And so we don't only undertake research in the Falkland Islands, we work closely with the UK overseas territories across the world. And the geographical diversity of the territories being based in the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian Oceans, and the Caribbean and Mediterranean seas means that there's also a vast biodiversity to be found in the overseas territories. And there's an estimated figure of 90% of the UK's biodiversity in its overseas territories. And this includes amazingly globally important species, such as the black-browed albatross on the Falkland Islands, where in fact 70% of the global population of black-browed albatrosses breed in the Falkland Islands. So as I say, we work across the overseas territories. On Ascension, we've worked to map the shallow marine and study the shallow marine environment there. Much of that research was published in peer-reviewed papers in a special issue of the Journal of Marine Biological Association of UK. With our director, Dr. Paul Brickle, we have currently staff in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And in addition to our territory-to-territory research collaborations, we also have global research partnerships and projects. And if you look across the world, we have a wealth of research partners from the USA to Australia, to South America, to Southern Africa. And in addition, we have also been developing a growing network of research institutes and alliances that we're either leading on or supporting. So this includes the now sister institutes of the Mid-Atlantic Research Institute in Anguilla in the Caribbean, the St. Helena Research Institute in St. Helena, and the Alliance, the Austral Earth Observation Alliance with university partners in Chile and other South American countries. So to conclude, from our base in the Falkland Islands, SARI is undertaking important research for the Falkland Islands, where we're discovering new species, providing important environmental baselines. We're a UK overseas territories-based organisation. We understand island scale, how to undertake research on and with other overseas territories. We're strengthening territory-to-territory relationships and building capacity through our cross-territory work. And in addition to our international partnerships and projects, we also have an outward global reach, all of which can contribute to Falklands' contribution to a global Britain.
Tara, thank you very much. When we see the integrated review by the end of November, my understanding is that one of the things that we will see in the review is a bigger commitment to science mean, Britain in the world is already known as a development superpower, and I think we'll see some wording that is likely to reflect the idea that we intend to be a science superpower, to really invest in British science. And when we see the terms of that as the review is worked through, then I hope that the work of SARI is given some mention in that. And I think that the work you've described is exactly relevant to the sorts of things that I understand the review is dealing with at the moment. So thank you. That was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's move on to James Sunderland, MP for Bracknell. He was elected in 2019 at the last election. He retired from the military as a colonel. Before that, serving on many tours in logistics. He's the vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the Falklands, and his tours of operations have taken him to many parts of the world and to the Falklands more than once. So, James, over to you. Nice to see you.
Professor, good afternoon, and it's a great pleasure to be here and a great privilege. I've served personally twice in the Falklands. I've got a huge fondness for the place and many fantastic personal memories. What I thought I'd do in my 6 minutes is do two things. Firstly, just to talk about the defence of the Falklands and to talk about how it's changed over the last few years, and then also to situate that in terms of the relationship between hard power and soft power, and indeed what we need to be doing, I think, now as we look forward. I first served in the Falklands in 1996. I was a young captain. I went down as the communications officer and the postal and courier officer. In fact, I was the postal and courier postmaster general for the South Atlantic, very grand title. And when I went down there, we had the Tornado F3 keeping us safe. We had C-130s doing the fishery patrol flights. The TriStar used to run up and down via Ascension back to Bryce Norton. And we had also had a VC-10 refuelling aircraft. Bristow helicopters, the fire gas flights across to the islands. And I would go across weekly to the radar sites and deliver classified material at the time. It was a fantastic privilege for a young captain to do that job. I became very familiar with the Falklands from the air. And then back in 2006, 10 years later, I returned for a shorter period, a couple of months, where I ran some exercises down there, Exercise Falklands Forum. We would deploy PJHQ, the Permanent Joint Headquarters, forward from northward down to the Falklands to run some exercises, to give the commander a run out. But of course, the nature of that particular location had changed. We had more submarines going down there. We had more ship movements going down. Of course, Typhoon came in a far superior capability than the F3 Tornado. So it was a different place 10 years later. And my view very much remains today that we must have a conventional military presence in the Falklands. And again, soft power is all very well, but it's most effective when it's underpinned by hard power. And I'm pretty clear, in line with what we've seen before in 1982, and of course the ongoing sovereignty claims from Argentina, that we do need to maintain that presence down there. And of course have that hub, which is so important to the South Atlantic. And just to bring it to the current day, we are at an inflection point now. We are experiencing, in my view, a perfect storm of strategic change. And what do I mean by that? Well, Brexit, of course, is upon us. COVID-19 has decimated much of 2020. We've got the Antarctic Treaty being renegotiated for 2048. China is resurgent, and China is very active and increasingly so in South America and in that part of the world. Global warming. And of course, in 2022, we've got the 40th anniversary of the Falklands conflict. So here we are with a lot changing in macro terms. We've also got the fisheries. Very important that we maintain the exports of the Falklands by making sure that we have markets for the fish down there. Hydrocarbons, oil exploration is big business at the moment, tourism, agriculture. And we mustn't forget also the strategic importance of the Falklands, geographical exploration, the gateway to the Antarctic. And of course, this must be set against the context of increased global competition. As markets expand, as countries need more resources, they will inevitably look further south and further north, down to the Antarctic. And it's important, therefore, that we have got that gateway. And I think there are 4 clear imperatives as of today, with where we are in terms of trade and economically. The first thing is, as we leave the European Union and think about post-Brexit UK, it's very important that the Falklands and all of our overseas territories are able to trade freely within the UK market. That's often ignored. But of course, we've got the internal market bill going through Parliament at the moment. It's about how the four devolved nations trade, but we must not forget how all of our overseas territories trade also. It's about gaining access to our overseas UK markets. So the free trade deals struck currently with Japan and hopefully other countries in due course, America, Canada, the list goes on. It's really important that we are able to make sure that the Falklands can also trade within those agreements. An EU deal is really important for me. Leaving the European Union without a deal and not able to negotiate a deal now would be a failure in my view. We must make sure, therefore, that we are able to trade freely with the European Union. And that's particularly important, of course, for fish going into Galicia in terms of southern Spain. And I think it's also very important that the Falklands are able to trade via unique bespoke agreements with South America. Quite difficult, perhaps, but the friendships that you already share with Chile, Brazil, Uruguay are really important. We must maintain those. And I think the last point I've got before I do be quiet is that it's also important for me that we have a renewed relationship with Argentina. Yes, we've got the joint communique. Yes, there's been some recent frictions, but underpinning prosperity and security in the South Atlantic, actually, it's about a good relationship with Argentina and with the UK, and making sure that all three partners are able to trade and to maximise the prosperity and the security of that region. And lastly, gateway to Antarctica. I mentioned it earlier, but this is also about science. It's about the environment. It's about trade. It's about fishing. It's about making sure that we are at the cutting edge of the global environment agenda. And as China becomes more resurgent again, it's also about making sure that in 2048, when we renegotiate the treaty, that we have that foothold and that we stay strong. Thank you.
James, thank you very much. Yeah, I think those points are very well taken. Solid defence, but I'm sure Leona would agree with you. Openness to the economic and the political and the environmental issues that will arise. None of them are getting any easier. And only by a policy of openness, but based on solid defence of the Falklands, can that strategy really go forward. I think those points are very well taken. Let me go on to James Gray, MP. James is the MP for North Wiltshire, has been since 1997. He's the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on polar regions and also the APPG on armed forces. He is big background in business and in shipping. He knows his way around Parliament and government really very, very well. He served for many years on the Defence Committee in Parliament and is now on the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy. And it's a great pleasure to see him here. James Gray, sir, over to you.
Well, Michael, thank you very much indeed. Although, what a tough gig it is to have to come fourth in this excellent afternoon, and behind such superb presenters as Leona, Tara, and my colleague James Sunderland. All three of you have put different thoughts about the importance of the Falklands to Britain and in the world, and I won't repeat them, but I do congratulate you on them. One thing no one so far said is that this, of course, is a fringe meeting of the Conservative Party conference. It's not a government conference, it's a Conservative Party conference. And I think I can assure listeners from the Falklands and across the world that the Conservative Party unanimously and vehemently and enthusiastically supports the continuing status of the Falkland Islands as they are. We fought for the independence of the Falkland Islands and we are massively committed. I think every single member of Parliament on the Conservative side at least would reiterate that. So we can take that opportunity in this party political event I have no idea, of course. I have no idea what Labour would say, and perhaps we ought to go and have a fringe of the Labour Party conference. I have no idea. No doubt they'd be perhaps just as interested. I have two particular aspects I'd like to talk about briefly. First is that I am chairman of a thing called the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, which seconds this year its 45 members of Parliament to the three services for 15 or 25 days a year. James Sunderland, I mentioned, I'm very glad to say, is doing the Royal Naval course this year, and he'll learn a lot about ships and being seasick and all that kind of thing, which he didn't get in the army. And we send down, it's normally I think 6 of our members down to the Falklands every year, mainly to see the armed services, but also, of course, to pay a visit to the governor and to the Parliament and to the civic side of the Falklands. I very much hope that we'll do that again this year. It'll be in the spring, I think, probably in the February half-term recess. But secondly, as Michael mentioned, I'm chairman, I think, of the all-party parliament group for the polar regions, which is an extremely active group, active in both poles. Now, the curious thing about the poles is that Britain, of course, at least the northern part of Britain, is only 400 miles away from the Arctic Circle. So we're the next best thing to the Arctic. We'll say a lot closer than China, who declare themselves to be a close to Arctic country. Nonetheless, I'm often critical of the Foreign Office because they sometimes are accused of being excessively concerned about the Antarctic, despite the fact that it's tens of thousands of miles away from Britain. Now, the reason for that is because of the huge importance to us of the Southern Ocean, of the South Atlantic, of the Falklands, and of Antarctica. And of course, we actually have territory under the Antarctic Treaty in Antarctica. So it's of enormous strategic geopolitical importance to us. And I'm certain that the integrated review, and incidentally, I congratulate the Falkland Islands Government on their first-class contribution to the review. It's really anyone that's interested in the Falklands should read that. It's a really first-class summary of the Falklands' importance to the United Kingdom. But we are absolutely committed to it for that reason. Now, my particular interest is with regard to Antarctica. And the Falklands sometimes describes itself as being the gateway to Antarctica. I believe that you have a very real reason for saying so. You're not actually all that close. Antarctica is, for the Falklands, is to Antarctica as Great Britain is to the North Pole. So it's a fair way away, but nonetheless, you're one of the closest parts, and of course the closest British part. Now, there's an enormous amount to be done with regard to tourism. We're concerned about tourism because tourism has risen exponentially, at least until this year. Of course, it's on hold this year. But the tourism is something which we must welcome in Antarctica, and welcome, incidentally, in South Georgia. I'll come back to South Georgia in one moment. But of course, it has to be handled extremely sensitively. We've only just gone through the massive operation of removing tens of millions of rats from the South Georgia, and indeed, incidentally, quite a large number of reindeer as well. And if that sort of infestation were to occur in mainland Antarctica, we'd be talking about an environmental catastrophe, and therefore it's vitally important that we should not do so. So the Falklands have a role to play with regard to tourism and keeping it under control, and we're watching out for the biosecurity of it. Secondly, of course, CAMLAR has a very, very important role to play in controlling the fisheries, particularly in the Southern Ocean and down towards Antarctica, and the Falklands and Britain play a very important role in CAMLAR. CAMLAR controls who fishes what and when. And of course, the fisheries are changing. They're moving south. The krill, traditionally around South Georgia, have moved southwards, and therefore much of the other rest of the biodiversity in the Southern Ocean has moved southwards with them. The fisheries are actually changing quite significantly. CAMLAR plays a very important role in that. And of course, CAMLAR plays a very important role in establishing marine protected areas. We have very well done forums we've done two so far around Antarctica. We must do one in the Weddell Sea coming up. The Weddell Sea by far the biggest victory to get an MPA in the Weddell Sea, currently blocked by Russia and China, but let's do some more work on that. So the Falklands have an important job to play in controlling fisheries, and of course the governor of the Falklands is also the commissioner of South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands, and I had the privilege of travelling to them a couple of years back on the Pharos, and to see that those magnificent islands. And the Falklands therefore play an important role in preserving South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. I think the word bridgehead might be better than gateway to the south. We've seen the turbulence in South America. We've seen the fact that the Argentina it can be difficult, shall we say, particularly with regard to international connections from the Falklands. And at all events, politics of South America are extremely volatile. So, for example, when we had to evacuate the British Antarctic Survey people from Antarctica, they came back via the Falklands, and from there, some by air, but very many of them by cruise ship, they came back to the UK. So that's a very important part of being a bridgehead towards South Georgia. Indeed, there are some who would say, towards the UK rather, there are some who would say that the Falkland Islands would be the natural home for the British Antarctic Survey. I'm sure there are all kinds of complex arguments there, and some people will be in favour of it and some won't, and I won't lose any friends by entering into a particular argument. But I think there's a very strong argument that says because the Falklands are so close to Antarctica, the British Antarctic Survey could have a bigger presence there, perhaps the best way to put it, than you do at the moment. So the Falklands and South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands are absolutely vital to British interests globally. We commit ourselves to maintaining those interests. We mustn't forget them. And I hope that the integrated review, when it comes out in November, will reiterate that strength of feeling. Particularly your gateway, from my point of view, your role as gateway to Antarctica is of huge importance from a commercial and from a fishing, as well as from a strategic standpoint in the run-up to the renegotiation of the Antarctic Treaty in 2048, although hopefully it won't be renegotiated, it'll simply carry on, is what we all hope it'll do. And above all, the Falklands have a huge role to play in the preservation of this most important and delicate of all environments in the world. So the Falklands are of vast importance to Britain. So thank you very much.
James, thank you very much, and I'm sure we all say all power to the parliamentary arguments that you make and the strength of feeling that you bring to these issues, which I know is appreciated by all of those with an interest in the environment and polar issues in general. I'm sure we'll come back to the integrated review issue because we've already got a couple of questions which reflect on that. But before we do, let me say the Q&A function is now live, so help yourselves if you want to pose a question. Our time is limited, but we'll do our best. But our final speaker is Dr. Peter Clegg, who is an associate professor at the University of the West of England. He's a specialist in all aspects of Britain's overseas territories, and he's covered many of the territories for the Commonwealth, for a number of organisations, not least for in reports to the government, to the United Nations, and to the OECD. So, as one of its overseas territories, Peter, over to you.
Michael, thank you very much. My colleagues have set out clearly the issues, opportunities and challenges facing the Falkland Islands over the next few years as part of the Global Britain brand. But in order to facilitate this in an effective manner, the nature of the relationship between the Falkland Islands and Britain needs to be understood and very possibly reconsidered and renewed. Over the next few minutes, I would like to set out briefly what the British government can do in concert with the Falklands to secure and, where possible, strengthen the territory's position. In particular, the need to do three things. First, recognise the diversity of the British overseas territories and the Falklands' place within the group. Second, consider the potential changes to the present constitutional framework of the Falklands. And third, the importance of not getting distracted by the issue of Falklands representation at Westminster. In terms of the first issue, the diversity of the British overseas territories, there are 14 territories and they are often considered together for obvious reasons. But it's important to recognise the tremendous diversity across the territories in terms of geography, population size, the economy and history. For example, most are economically self-sufficient, but a few are not. Some have significant offshore financial centres, but many do not. So it's vital when discussing the territories, including the Falklands, the specific characteristics of each territory are. So as we've heard, the Falklands is fiscally responsible and self-sufficient. The economy is based on trade and tourism with no international financial services. It has a stable, well-functioning and legitimate political system, and it has a long-standing reputation for good governance and has adopted a raft of human rights guarantees. The islanders retain very strong support and commitment to the UK, but they wish to be seen as being a partnership and consequently treated with respect. Sometimes that does not happen, and often that is laced with a residual paternalistic attitude from London. A true partnership based on full mutual respect would help advance the respective agendas of the Falklands and Britain. In terms of the second issue, the potential changes to the present constitutional framework of the Falklands. As with all of the territories, the Falklands has a constitution which was negotiated in concert with Britain. The present constitution dates from 2009, and there is an appetite for it to be revised. As with all of the other territories, there is a balance of power and responsibilities between the Falklands government on the one hand and the British government, including the governor, on the other. The level of devolved government in the Falklands is much like the other territories, even though the Falklands is perhaps and economically stable than some of the other territories. So the question is, can the next constitutional review go further and afford greater responsibility to the Falklands? Precedent is an issue here. Agreeing greater autonomy for one territory might mean others want the same, but is that enough to prevent the Falklands being rewarded for its good record? Of course, British responsibility for external affairs and defence remains absolute. But what about issues such as the public service, removal of public officers, and the administration of justice and audit? All of those are British responsibilities. Also, the governor, in certain circumstances, can overrule or impose changes on the locally elected government. A thorough and open review of the Constitution to further empower the people of the Falklands would, I think, be welcome. And the third issue, not getting distracted by the issue of Falklands representation at Westminster. Over the last several months, there has been chatter within the Conservative Party and sections of the media about pushing for parliamentary representation for the territories, primarily Gibraltar, but the others too. It's been seen as giving a stronger and more direct voice to the peoples of the territories, including when British legislation impacts on them. However, it is important to note that these discussions are not particularly new. Over several decades, the issue of parliamentary representation for the territories has raised its head, but there has been little. For example, the 2000 Royal Commission of the Reform of the House of Lords, led by Lord Wakeham, argued all the overseas territories have their own governments. None is represented in the House of Commons, nor are they part of the United Kingdom. We see no case at present for any of the overseas territories to be formally represented or given a voice in the second chamber. One of Leona's colleagues, Teslin Bartman, explained more recently. Currently, we can appeal to 650 members of Parliament, whereas we would be funneling and bottlenecking our issues from a vast number of territories, or even a singular territory through one. There are also concerns about who would provide that representation. Could a single person represent the rest of a territory? Also, at a time when Falklands and the other territories are wanting greater autonomy, Westminster representation might create the opposite effect. Further, some of the British proponents of change have a rather paternalistic attitude. For example, one argued, this is not something which is supposed to be decided by local areas or dependent territories. And note the word dependent within that context. That hasn't been used officially for over 20 years. It is something decided by the UK National Parliament. It is the UK's parliamentary responsibility, no one else's, to bring this about. Again, such views do not go down well in the territories. So if one wants to look at structures in London, then consider how effectively the interests of the territories are considered across Whitehall. Often the decision-making is disjointed, with limited contact with ministers. So to conclude, to further the role of the Falkland Islands as part of global Britain, perhaps three things should be considered. First, fully appreciating the characteristics of the Falklands today, and it is in no practical sense a colony. Second, empowering the local government as much as possible, including through constitutional reform. And third, not getting distracted by debates over representation at Westminster, but rather focusing on how Whitehall can best engage with and understand the interests of the Falklands. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much. That was characteristically incisive and challenging. I would expect no less from a fellow academic. Thank you. Okay, we've got a few minutes now for questions. We've got two or three. The first one is a very straightforward one about the integrated review and the possibility of defence cuts. And it's simply, can we anticipate defence cuts in the integrated review? Let me just ask James Gray. You're the closest probably to that sort of thinking. James, what are your expectations for the integrated review on expenditure?
We must not allow the overall cost of COVID to cut across our defence spending. Of course, there may well be changes, and defence is changing every day. We're going to be becoming much more electronic, much more new in our outlook. All sorts of changes will occur, and this integrated review will be a good way of doing it. But if it's an excuse, if it's camouflage for straightforward defence cuts, then people like me in the House of Commons will be very strongly opposing it. It's a very, very dangerous world, and we simply can't afford to reduce our defence spending at a time like this.
Thank you. James Sunderland, did you want to make a comment as well, since this obviously falls into the category of the things you spoke about?
Yeah, very quickly, I think we are committed and must be committed to at least 2% of GDP. We know that COVID-19 is going to require some money to be put back into the Treasury. So what does that mean for defence? I don't know is a simple answer. We also know that space and cyber are growing areas of conflict at the moment. So I do fear that there may be some fiscal challenges on the horizon, but I'm pretty confident that when it comes to the Falklands, we should be okay, and that we must have those conventional forces down there for the future.
Okay. James Gray, did you want to come back on that? It looked as if you had a...
Yeah, very brief word of warning. 2% of GDP is correct. Yeah. But of course, GDP is going down very, very sharply indeed because of COVID. And we don't mean 2% of GDP, we mean the amount of money which is currently being spent, plus some, which may well turn out to be 3% of a reduced GDP.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, GDP figures aren't going to mean very much for the next couple of years for any of us in Europe. Okay, let me ask Tara a question. That one came in about this astonishing figure that, you know, the overseas territories account for 90% of the UK's biodiversity. Do you think that that will be taken into account when we think about our climate change policies? Do you have a sense that that is well understood across government? That was the second question that came through.
Thanks. So I think there are some existing mechanisms and some existing sectors of government that I think do recognise this. And there are schemes that government has set up, for example, the Darwin Plus initiative, a funding scheme to fund biodiversity and climate change projects across the overseas territory. So I think there's an element of government that recognises that. However, I think in the wider conversations around climate change, maybe at a UK level, and looking not solely at overseas territories, but looking more globally, then maybe the overseas territories aren't directly involved in those conversations, and it probably would be useful to be. But I don't know if Leona wanted to add something from a government perspective, but from a research perspective, you know, the wider conversations that it would be really useful to be a part of. Nevertheless, we do kind of undertake our own climate research, we do climate change research, we do host climate change researchers, and as was spoken about earlier, we do provide a gateway for climate change research further south.
Okay, thanks. Leona, do you want to come in on that? I had a second question to put to you, but you just want to respond on that one to start with?
Not a great deal to add, really. I think Tara's covered most of it. I mean, this is something that we're determined to keep working on and to provide support to the UK. Organisations such as SARI have a great deal to offer, and so we're just going to continue strengthening and developing there, really.
Okay, the other question I wanted to explore with you is something that came up from what Peter said, and somebody else had mentioned it, this question of greater autonomy for overseas territories. I mean, you must think about this all the time, I imagine, in your official role. I mean, what for you would greater autonomy, what are the most important aspects of greater autonomy sitting where you sit at the moment?
Well, I think, you know, as I said in my 6 minutes, we've come a long way in the last 38 years, and that is a relationship that's still developing. We are currently in the early stages of undertaking a constitutional review. That's expected to take a few years. I mean, it's challenging because, you know, we're very proud of being a member of the UK family, and with no aspirations towards independence or anything like that. But there is scope for greater autonomy, definitely. And, you know, some of those things do need to be teased out in the future. I think it's changing all the time and, you know, evolving constantly. No easy answers to it. But I would also reinforce the point that was made about the representation in Westminster. I mean, I completely agree with what was said there. You know, we continue to feel that the system as it stands works for us. A greater cross-Whitehall sort of approach would be helpful, and increasing direct contact between the Falkland Islands Government and Whitehall as well, obviously.
Thank you. Just one more brief comment from Peter. Somebody else came in and said, what would a more equitable balance of interest between the UK and the overseas territories look like? I mean, can you do that in a few seconds?
I think it's following what Leona said, really. I think it's seeing where within the present constitution, further power autonomy provided, perhaps the role of the governor, the background of the governor, the responsibilities of the governor, and just trying to really change the mindset a little bit. This is a true partnership almost between equals.
Okay, that's fine. We have to leave it there. Thank you all very much. Thanks, Michael Betts, for setting this up, and Leona Roberts, Tara Palembe, James Sunderland, James Gray, and Peter Clegg. Thank you all. I hope you've got a better idea of what the Falklands is all about as a result of this. Thank you.